Hey, welcome to Guitar Zone. I'm Robert Noel. Well, how you doing? How you feeling? I hope you're feeling all right. Well, I don't do songs too often on my Guitar Zone sites and my learning sites. I only use songs when I'm trying to teach you something about a technique or a skill, usually, okay? Because I want you to be a great guitar player. This is more about rhythm playing. Also, we're dealing with chords in this song that would be what I term in the dominant 7, using dominant 7 chords, the family of dominant 7. So, Feelin' All Right, I choose this song by Dave Mason. I'm kind of the old hippie thing where I grew up with Joe Cocker, and one of my friends played guitar with Joe Cocker, and I just feel that the Joe Cocker with Leon Russell on the piano is really cool. So I hope you listen to it, and maybe listen to, there's got to be a lot of versions of this song out there. But here's a 2-chord song, and you should really get into hearing the drummer, the keyboards, the vocals, the parts, so that you learn how to phrase your guitar. Because the way I'm doing it is I want to be a little bit funky with this. It's a rock funky song. So I want it to rock, but it's got to have the funk in there. So these are skills that you have to learn by going on missions, journeys of discovery with your right hand. And what you're going to notice is when I do chords, I'm going to be muting a lot of times. So if you're using the iReal, as most of my students do, the iReal application, the Feeling All Right chart that I've done, I'm putting it in the key of C, okay? It can be done in different keys. I've done it in G and other keys according to what vocal key works for people. But C is the key that Joe Cocker does it in. I've got the tempo up to 95. And I've got the 2 chords based as we're looking at your C7 chord and your F7. Notice I play my F7 the groovy way. I use my thumb. But I can hit 3 notes, 4 notes, 5, 6. And when I use my C7, quite often, I can throw the 5 in the bass, which is the G. So I also know I have other C7s available, right? C7, 6. F13 could be used. There's a way I play F13. And sometimes we can take the F7 and just add the 3rd or 4th finger in on the major 6, which gives us the 13. Sometimes I'll use that added 7 type 1 bar chord, F7. But a lot of times I like to have that hammering 2nd finger. That's why I use the groovy method with the thumb. And then I go to, if I want to use that hammering technique, which is really cool to get that kind of groovy thing going. Now, the other chords that I'm going to be using, I can use, there's various 7th chords that you should be able to play. And even 9 chords are in. Here's a 9-chord no root. That's acceptable as a dominant substitution. The 13, the 13-9. The added 7 once again. We can use a sus to the dominant, to major 3rd here. We can add a 9. We can add the 7 and the minor 3rd on the top plus 9. Could be a possible chord. When I go to the F chords in this position, I'm looking at a form 4 F7, just like the C7 down here, which I can also add the 5 in the bass. Okay? And then there's other varieties that you'll learn. The 13th chords, and 7th chord, F, F7, These triads are very useful. Thirteen, 13, 7, 7, hammered, and a plain old 9 chord. I like to use my 9 chord with the 3rd finger barred because I can add the 13 there on the F9 to F13. Or I can throw the 5 in the bass. Gives me a nice big full chord, which would be just like the F7 with the 5 in the bass. You might also notice that I use some harmonic movement. I'm coming into the C chord, coming into the F chord, flowing into the F, flowing into the C. And then we can even do steps, harmonic steps. So when you start getting into the rhythm, I'm going to say that you should start with real simple rhythm, 1, 2, 3, 4, and count 1, 2, 3, 4 every measure, and then 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then get to the 1D and a 2D and a 3D and a 4D and a. That's where you're going to get a little more funky because you got a little more, you're getting more busy. But you want to remember in songs, if you play the song with a group or in a situation, you want to always have different versions of rhythm. Sometimes it's good to have simple, basic rhythm that creates space, because space is a really cool thing, to have space in your rhythm. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 1. Having that space is really nice. Keyboard player solo, when you're doing a solo, it's nice to have that space in there. You'll make friends, musician friends, when you create space and you complement who's ever playing with you. So you have a verse where they're singing, and you have a chorus where they're singing, and you have solos, and you have an introduction and an ending. So you have a lot of different rhythms that you could specify for each one of those parts. What are you going to play during the chorus? Feeling all right. You know, when he's singing the verses, what rhythm are you going to be doing? You don't want to do something that steps on the singer, that takes away and puts the eyes on you. You want to be complimenting. But maybe during a solo or in your solo, you start to hit some rhythm chords, and they're cool, they're groovy. Maybe they're even part of your solo. All right, so I hope you're feeling all right. There's a lot to do with this song. It's a 2-chord song, but you can learn so much. So when I was playing those C's and F's, don't forget all of those chords that I played here in the open position, and the ones I played in 8th position, and 5th position, and 3rd position. All those chords can be played in the upper positions too. I could be playing my C9 up here, and my F13, my F9 no root, so I can be voicing up in these higher regions too, and those little triads, those 3 notes. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm doing 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. So notice when I go 1, 2, 3, I'm getting some, I'm taking my hands, the pressure off my fingers. I'm getting those mutes. 1 and 2. 1 and 2, 3, 4. Now what you just heard, very important. The 2 and 4, just like when you do shuffles. That second beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, comes from the blues, but rock owns it also, and we can also own that system of thinking about the second beat and fourth beat and this funky feeling all right. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I hit that 2 and 4, I'm letting the pressure off my chord so that I get a mute. Okay, so I'm getting 1, 2. That 2 is all the notes in my chord, but they're muted. So it's like a percussive. And that's what's getting the rhythm to funk. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Now you're hearing those 1D and a 1D and a D and a 3D and a 4D and a 2D and 3D and a 4D and a 2D and 3. Now notice sometimes I'm upstroking on the third beat. 1, 2, 3. 1D and a 2D and 3D and a 4D and a 2D and 3D and a 1D and a 2D and 3. So that third beat, something about it, it adds some funk when I accent that. And 1D and a 2D and 3. 1D and a 2D and 3D and a 4D and a 1. I'm still muting the 2 and the 4, but I'm accenting that 3. 1D and a 2. 1D and a 2D and 3 is upstroke. And I'm accenting it. 1D and a 2D. 1D and a 2D and 3D and 4D and when I hit that 4, it's muted. 4D and 1D and a 2D and did you hear that 2D and 2D and down, up, down, up. That's all muted. So is the 4D and so 1D and a 2D and 3D and a 4D and 1D and a 2D and 3D and 4D and a 2D and 3D and 4D and D and a 2D and 3D and a 4D and D and a 2. That 2, it's hard. I'm hitting it pretty good. I'm accenting it, but it's muted. 1D and down, up, down, up. 1D and a 2. Muted. 1D and a 2D and then my 3. 1D and a 2D and 3. Now notice that the flow of my wrist, it keeps going. It doesn't stop. I don't stop on any beats, whether I'm doing 1 and 2 and or 3. 1, 2, 3. My wrist is always going down, 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 up, down, up, down. See that wrist? Always going. Doesn't stop. 1D and a 2D and 3D and 4D and a 1D and a 2D, 3D and... But you can see that 3, how I'm bringing that in a little heavier accent. 1D and a 2D and 3 and a 4D and a 1D and 3, 13th chords. 1D and a 2D and 3D and a 3 and a 1D and a 2D and D and a 4 and a 1D and a 2. If I was just doing 1D and a 2D and 3, 1D and a 2D and 3. And a 1D and a 2D and 3D and a 4D and a 1D and a 2D, 3D and a 4D. So, I'm starting to get carried away, but I'm doing that so you can watch my wrist and watch my chords. And sometimes I'm switching 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 chords to a measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So sometimes it's 3 chords. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it's 2 chords. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. So that means a lot too, because my harmony's changing and I've got little melodies. Now when you listen, and I really hope you listen to Joe Cocker, you're going to hear Leon Russell, really fabulous Mad Dogs and Englishman keyboard player. You should really get into the history of Joe Cocker and Leon Russell. It's really cool stuff. Anyways, my hippie days, right? So listen to what Leon plays on the piano. He does this bass line. You're going to hear his piano go ba-do-da-da. So I'm in form 2. I'm hearing a root, a perfect fifth, and a dominant 7. Boo-do-da-da. Boo-do-da-do. Boo-do-da-do. And then he goes boo-do-da-da. He goes down, does the same riff, 1, 5, but he goes to the 6 instead of the minor 7 or dominant 7. Boo-da-da. Boo-da-do-do-do-da-da. Boo-do-da-do-do-do-da-da. So you can play this in different ways. I could play it down here. I could play do-da-da. And then I could go, could put my in this case, a major third. So I get this dominant 7. Bo-do-da-da, boo-do-da-do-do-do-da-da. So you start hearing that boo-boo-da-da, boo-do-da-do-do-do-da-da. So you see that keyboard player gets me into the groove. It leads me into, I could actually even play that little part along with Leon or a keyboard player or with a bass player doing that part. And that might really sound cool. So I can employ a bass part or a keyboard part. And the other thing that you want to listen to is the drummer. Now on the iReal, you're going to hear the first 3 bars are a basic rhythm, but that 4th bar, the drummer has a little riff. You know, ba-do-da-da, ba-do-da-da-da-da-da, ba-do-da-da-da-da-da, and then here's the drummer. So that 4th rev, you're going to, and then it leads back to the 1st bar again. So you want to be conscious. Your drummer is setting a groove for you, and you can play with that drummer. You can accent with his drum parts. You can accent with the bass parts, with the keyboard parts. So much you can do. Well, anyways, I hope this gets you feeling better. Feeling all right. Yay! Once again, thanks for coming by the Guitar Zone. I hope you'll go by my Patreon site, and that's where you can become a member and you can get into all the videos and my PDFs, and I can give you lessons online and just all kinds of good stuff. My art, there's all kinds of crazy hippie stuff and things there. So stay tuned. Tune in and turn on, because this is a great song. When you've got a really blasé gig and everyone's down and got the blues, and you come in with that funky rhythm and you start singing, I'm feeling all right, they're going to love you. They're going to go nuts. Yeah, it's going to be great. Because what you're doing is the power of music. They're down, not feeling too good, not a really exciting audience, but you bring them into it. You bring them into the way you communicate with your guitar playing, with your vocals, with the band, and tell those people, come on, time to get out of that chair and start dancing, you know? And this is how music heals people. It makes people feel good. And I don't call it magic. I call it science. The science today, in this lesson, of feeling all right. All right.